I'd like to believe that because it has become such a global phenomenon, that Dr. Hynek would feel that that he spearheaded much of that. Because even at the time of Blue Book and then thereafter, he served in many ways as the American ambassador on the subject. When they had, as far as the hearings, for example, at the United Nations, and Hynek would testify there. But granted, that had nothing to do with the United States government, but nonetheless, Hynek was invited, as far as he was provided with diplomatic status and, served as, American representative, regarding the UFO phenomenon. And because there has been this constant drumbeat of disclosure, and Hynek would be the first one, championing as far as, that effort. So I believe in many ways that he would feel that today's effort has only, intensified in the very direction that he attempted to propel Blue Book and even the Center for UFO Studies thereafter.
Greetings and welcome to the Vortex. I'm your host, Daniel Allen Jones, and I'm honored to be joined here by Don Schmitt. Don.
Good to be here, thank you.
So we're here at the UFO Conference in Edinburg, Texas, talking about this subject, looking into the research and the experiencers' accounts of what they've dealt with. You have had an interesting opportunity to work alongside one of the legendary figures, which we now see portrayed in a History Channel show called Project Blue Book. You yourself worked alongside Dr. J. Allen Hynek, so that's pretty amazing. How has that been for you?
I always comment that there isn't a week that goes by that I don't think, now what would Alan say, or what would Alan do regarding a particular project, or a witness, or information that would come across our desks, that type of thing. And I find that I'm in many ways just walking in his shoes, in that what Alan, and that's the one thing that the TV show is dramatizing. Hynek loved field work.
Yeah.
When he was, and the thing is, people have this false impression with the TV series that he was actually out in the field, when in reality it would just be a monthly trek from Evanston, Illinois, down to Dayton, Ohio at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and then just wade through the files as they were. And most of them were very mundane. Things that he just by first impression, explained: balloon, star, moon, that type of thing. And what frustrated Hynek from early on, and only, reached a point of where he was willing to walk. In fact, he threatened to resign numerous times with Blue Book, was that he realized he was not getting the legitimate cases, the hardcore cases, as he would call them. He realized that they were going upstairs, as he would put it. But in his latter years, 15 years after Blue Book, and with the Center for UFO Studies, and when our chief investigator, Alan Hendry, resigned, and Alan had to then take the helm as far as with our monthly International UFO Reporter as the editor, and he was fielding the phones, and he hated that. He hated sitting at a desk in that regard. But in the last couple of years of his life, and he was specifically investigating the Hudson Valley sightings, the boomerang sightings in the early 80s. And he once again was in the field. And here was an investigator that would be up to Hessdalen, where he would trudge through snow knee-deep, or he would be to Papua New Guinea as far as the Father William Gill case, and from the plane that they had to carry him on their shoulders into the jungle because, they had miles to still walk before arriving at the scene. We would talk that Alan, again, was doing what he did best. And we would joke, he was playing cowboys and Indians. But that's what he was best at, because he especially loved the interaction. He loved people. He loved, you could, cases that, were just, a dime a dozen, that were just routine reports that we would learn from and heard of over and over again. Alan would be there just as passionately and with his notepad and writing everything down, because he loved being in chase.
Yeah.
And as long as you're in the game, you will be there for the win or the loss, but you'll be there. And we just applauded him on because we wanted him. He deserved it. If anyone deserved to be, at the end game, it was Alan Hynek.
That's really incredible. So he came across several notable figures throughout his career, including some that you mentioned earlier, Sagan, and many of these different people who were not proponents of the ET hypothesis, at least as far as the activity behind UFOs and the involvement.
Well, you mentioned Sagan, and let's be very blunt about it. In Sagan's early years, his early comments regarding the phenomena, like in the late 60s, he was actually pro-UFO. But unlike Hynek, who was a man of his word, a man of principle, who again went where the evidence took him, where he was from skeptic to the fact that he was accepting that there was legitimate UFO phenomena.
Yeah.
Whereas with Sagan, at the moment the government grants, the funding came in, he sold his soul. I mean, he went where the money was.
Yeah.
And they would joke that, well, he was an heir to Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show because he was one of the #1 guests and he was the one that finally, brought Carson into amateur astronomy. So, quick story, and I didn't mention it in my talk. When Alan died, when Dr. Hynek passed away, and immediately Steven Spielberg contacts Mimi Hynek.
That's his wife.
His wife.
Yep.
And I'm so sorry to hear about Alan, and we were going to do a sequel to the CE3, we had already, had private discussions, and so I'm sorry he didn't live to see that. And what can I do? What can I do to help in Alan's memory? And she immediately, suggested, anything that helps the boys, and she always, as Alan always called us, the boys.
Yeah.
Whatever helps the boys keep the center going in Chicago. And Spielberg, well, of course, that's the least I can do. So I'll send you something very shortly. So we're waiting weeks, and we're thinking from Spielberg, and the Close Encounters movie has internationally grossed almost $500 million.
Wow.
So it's more than lining his pockets to me.
Yeah.
And I could talk for another half an hour on what it cost Hynek, because Hynek did not make any money on the Close Encounters movie.
Oh,
He
wow.
did not. He lost money. Well, so we're waiting weeks, and then a month, and then 2 months, and it's our next board meeting, and Hynek's successor, Dr. Mark Rodiger, has informed all of us that Mimi has received an envelope. She's received a mailing from Spielberg, from Amblin Productions, and it's what we've been waiting for. And we're thinking at the very least that, it'll pay our rent for a year.
Sure.
Or it'll fund a specific project that we were, gearing up to, investigate. And so we're all sitting at the boardroom, and Mimi, I hope you're all sitting down, and I'm going to open the envelope for the first time. And we hear her open the envelope over the speakerphone, and we hear, oh my God. And from this to, it's more than she thought it was. And then we hear, oh my God. And we start to go the other way. It's like,
oh no.
Oh no. It was a check for $1,000.
Wow.
$1,000. Didn't pay our rent for a single month. And then to know that Spielberg was sending to Cornell, as arranged by Carl Sagan, for just the maintenance of their dish, as far as their satellite, their tracking dish, $100,000 a year.
Wow.
It's not fair.
Yeah.
And the point is, Sagan and Spielberg never did anything together, whereas Hynek did.
Yeah.
So again, another example where he gave and gave and gave and gave and got nothing for it. It's tragic.
Yeah.
It should never happen to anyone, especially the likes of a J. Allen Hynek. And that's where we're all the more compelled. The finish what he started.
Absolutely. So you're living on this legacy of finding the truth, and I think that goes to show that there is something behind investigating. What would you say when we're dealing with investigating this phenomenon? Whether it's not just the physical, some people say nuts and bolts craft and sightings, but you have the close encounters. You have this close proximity of exotic materials or entities. So this is now a big component in this field. When it comes to your work, and you've been a big proponent of the Roswell case for a number of years now, what do you find the driving motive when it comes to investigating this phenomenon? Why is it that we look into this subject so extensively?
Well, for me, quite simply, you're talking the biggest story in our lifetimes in the last 1,000 years, for that matter. And it's for me, it's always a cause for just really wrestling with the motivation of people nowadays when you consider a story of this magnitude. And how many people just give it a yawn?
Yeah.
They could care less. And it's like, but don't you realize it changes everything?
Yeah.
And I'm proud of the fact that that's very summer of '47, because of that whole wave that surrounded Roswell, that even the Vatican puts out, the statement that it was the position of the church, the universe is most likely teeming with other creations. And they've reiterated that in recent years. So the point being, don't give me this, it's gonna hurt religion, it's gonna hurt Christianity. No. Because if you're true to your faith and you realize that it encompasses all, everything, then the only thing that it changes is the governments. It changes as far as our nationalities, the idea that we have specific allegiances, to our respective governments, and we realize that for the first time we're Earthlings.
Yeah.
And we're just part of the galactic neighborhood, so to speak.
Yeah.
And why don't we stop, get off of this, the petty jealousies, and as far as the fact that we can't even get along with our own families and our neighborhoods, let alone country after country, and realize that there's a much bigger stick out there. We better start behaving, because we're still acting like spoiled little brats down here.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's a reason a lot of people shy away from it, because it's so big, it's too big to comprehend.
Sure.
And I often, when young people ask me, well, how do you get involved with this? And I often advise them not to, because as you were described, it's become so complicated. It's so overwhelming that how do you just dive right in and really make, a dent, leave an impression. When for those of us, Dr. Michael Swords, I love the fact that as a historian, and he likes to, always test us in part of his own group. And I love the fact that he goes, Don, you're the only one that even takes the test. Because the other guys, they realize they know nothing. And it still comes back to, just like with Roswell, that if you don't understand where we've been, how do you have any concept of where we're going?
Yeah.
And that's something that also, is alarming to me. That there's so many good older cases that need to be reinvestigated with the new tools, the new technology.
Yeah.
And we may find that, well, no, here's the explanation. Here's what that really was, because we now examined it, and now or we may solidify it. We may come up with new witnesses we weren't even aware of. I mean, that's a great thing as far as like the Pascagoula, as far as what Calvin was talking about, and the fact that now there are new witnesses that have come forward. But so we need to continue to keep things fluid and always remain open-eyed to the possibility that it's never case closed, that there's always, there should remain the energy to go back and always look back and bring things into the contemporary and realize that it only emboldens, it strengthens, our work.
Yeah.
Because these were the classic cases of the past, and we need to retain them as the classic cases of also the present.
So it's important to study the history of the research of these sightings, and any of the information that's out there might still be handled in the way of its own time. But like you're saying, it puts it all in perspective, especially with now We have all the technology at our disposal. Everyone's got cameras and things, but these cases that we can go back into with our modern technology and modern understanding of things can lend us some insight about the phenomenon in general.
Absolutely. And when you look at the fact that we have, there's been an ebb and a flow as far as the actual people involved, but certainly with social media, I like to believe there's more people actively involved in the field than ever before.
Yeah.
And they need to become actively involved. I'm sorry, social media is just that. It's social media.
Yeah.
It's like a social club. And we need the people, who are still willing to go into the trenches.
That's just it.
To, as Dr. Hynek, play cowboys and Indians.
Yeah.
And that's the payback. That is what is truly gratifying when you come, with the results of an investigation and you can say, I advanced the field because I've been able to take maybe a case that was 50 years old and produce more evidence in support of what happened 50 years ago, and I'm now able to demonstrate that it was exactly as the witnesses said back then. And those are the accomplishments. Those are the breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Because, as we know, in investigating UFO, sightings today, there's so much chaff, very little wheat, because there's so many alternative possibilities, there's so many possible explanations. And then in dealing with the press and in dealing as far as with witnesses who more than ever have been contaminated.
Sure, predisposed to other concepts.
Exactly. And back then it was pretty pristine. It was very virgin in its context. And it's a wonderful thing about Roswell, that they had nothing to influence them back then. This was unprecedented. There's nothing in the Army manual as far as, crashed UFO, what do we do next?
Yeah.
But I also harken back to that time period in that, as fresh as I mentioned in my talk, as War of the Worlds, that broadcast in 1938, was in their memories, was in their minds, that there was no panic, there was no mass suicide, they lived their lives, they worked their jobs, they raised their families, they were there.
Yeah.
And so for anyone to suggest that, we can't handle it, no. You will never convince me of that. We handle it, we live with it.
I think it's one of those things that anyone you ask, either has or knows someone who has an experience regarding UFOs or something which they might interpret as otherworldly, but they suppress it because a lot of times in our society, unless it's pop culture or Hollywood, it's kind of taboo. You're not supposed to talk about it.
And that's the word, taboo.
Yeah.
But who made it taboo? Witnesses didn't make it taboo. The phenomenon for sure didn't make it taboo because it's still, they're poking us in the eyes every so often saying, hey, we're still here.
Yeah.
And there again, Roswell. And one of the arbiters, the cover-up, General Roger Ramey, the very balloon press conference was at his office at Carswell Army Airfield in Fort Worth.
Florida, that's where I'm from.
And a few days later, he's on a radio program in El Paso, and he's asked, well, General, the balloon explanation, okay, that's Roswell. But what about all the other sightings?
Yeah.
Haven't there been sightings in every other state throughout the nation? And General Ramey agrees, yes, that's true, except for Kansas, which is a dry state. So it's the first inference that the only people that see such things are people who over imbibe. And the beginning of the ridicule factor.
That's just it, the ridicule factor.
And it is only intensified ever since. We all have that knee-jerk reaction. That I even find that whenever, you're a writer, what do you write about? And you have to kind of, tone the water,
Yeah,
how are they going to handle this? So I actually tell them. And I'm finding, no matter how professional, doctors, lawyers, and scientists, I finally admit, I read about Roswell. Oh, I know what happened there. That's that crash in 1947. I mean, they even know the year.
Yeah.
And then they start telling me about their experiences.
Yeah, that opens them up.
And so I had to stop that because I caught myself for years apologizing. And it's something Dr. Hynek would have given me a kick in the behind
Oh yeah.
and say, come on, boys, follow me. And I lead the charge, but you got to be with me. And it's like, Dad, I'm with you.
Well, that brings us to, I think, our last point that we'll close with. So when we have all this happening with Hynek, and he's really contending with the military to dig down and find the real cases, not just the ones that were dismissive.
It was unbelievable how often he tried with the brass.
Yeah.
You want me as a scientific consultant, let me be a scientist.
Yeah.
Let me investigate this as a scientist.
And in his commendable work to try to provide that for us, I think is testament in a lot of the work that you've done and what people are trying to do in this field of what we call ufology, or just anomalous studies in general. There's a portion within these circles that want this to be accessible to the public.
Absolutely.
They don't want there to be an issue with national security or defense secrecy. We understand that those are real issues and protocols that the government military has to follow, but when it comes to letting people know about this, some people say the people are ready or people aren't ready. We need to keep it tight-lipped. But I would like to get your take on two things here. Both involving your impression and what you can share with us about what Hynek would have liked to have said about this, about the nature of the field in its current day, in our modern time frame, with everything at our disposal, with all these different groups and factions in this whole fiasco. There's so much contending and infighting sometimes, drama, but there's some serious truth seekers out there who are doing the work, who are getting out there and going into the field and actually looking into it. And one thing I like to think is we won't know if we don't go. So
precisely,
we can't just sit here and watch YouTube videos and look at Wikipedia and then say, well, we're suddenly an expert or something. We have to go and talk to these witnesses, talk to the people who know what they saw, get out to the location, as we did yesterday, to the crash sites, and find out if there's any tangible material there. Now, what is your impression on the integrity that someone like Hynek had in bringing this material out for our current time frame? And then also, would you feel like he would have been proud of the new show on the History Channel that shows him in a different light?
I'd like to believe that because it has become such a global phenomenon, that Dr. Hynek would feel that he spearheaded much of that. Because even at the time of Blue Book and then thereafter, he served in many ways as the American ambassador on the subject. When they had, as far as the hearings, for example, at the United Nations, and Hynek would testify there. Granted, that had nothing to do with the United States government, but nonetheless, Hynek was invited, as far as he was provided with diplomatic status and, served as, American representative, regarding the UFO phenomenon. And because there has been this constant drumbeat of disclosure, and Hynek would be the first one, championing as far as, that effort. So I believe in many ways that he would feel that today's effort has only, intensified in the very direction that he attempted to propel Blue Book, and even the Center for UFO Studies thereafter. His greatest obstacle for years was the funding, lack of funding.
Yeah. And
that as certain people have stepped forward, I think if he were, and thinking that he would realize what Spielberg, how he stabbed him in the back this last time after he passed away, that he would take that as a major insult. But the fact that others have, stepped to the fore and provided such funding, I think he'd be very proud of the museum in Roswell that we have 250,000 people a year go through, and the fact that in the very Walk of Fame there's that portrait that I did of Hynek hanging there, as one of the true father of as far as UFO investigations. And leading up to the series now, and the fact that there are more UFO programs on than ever before.
Oh yeah.
And there's only more coming.
Sure.
In fact, we've been told, as far as like the Travel Channel that was just bought out by Discovery, that they were immediately told that more UFO program, more UFO. I think Hynek would be very proud of Project Blue Book because he's portrayed in a way that he's more of the believer in the series, but he's still a believer in the sense that we're dealing with an actual phenomenon. And I'm the one who's calling for a legitimate investigation of it, and that we need to follow legitimate methodology. at least acquiring what the truth is, no matter where it takes us.
Yeah.
And so he would, for having worked with Hollywood, with Close Encounters, he realizes creative license, and that Hollywood does what it needs to do to attract an audience. I mean, their foremost concern is certainly ratings, and then getting renewed, because then everybody's happy.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's exactly the way that the series is going. So, saddest part, certainly he's not there, but for his own family, his two sons that are part of the series, and as long as they're satisfied with it, then who am I? So no. We know the fact from the fiction, but nonetheless, I mean, it's Alan Hynek that is serving, is actually the true Mully and Scully in this series. And isn't it ironic that at the moment, and I just read the other day again, they're referring to it as the new X-Files.
Yeah. Well,
wouldn't that be the ultimate irony?
Well, I think, it's something that we're really looking forward to with the new season. It's a fun show, but it really does highlight his drive to get out the information and do it in a way that's not compromising himself or the American people who need to know about this, who really have a place in our history that says, I think it's time that this be revealed. So
precisely,
I think you're doing a great commendable work by living in this legacy of truth seeking, getting that information out there, covering the topics which are controversial enough that none of these news networks take it with seriousness. So Don, I wanted to say thank you for your time here. It's been absolutely
I enjoyed this. Thank you for the time. Thanks for having me as far as the entire conference. Just a wonderful experience. I couldn't recommend it more highly. Thank you.
Appreciate it. And we'll see you in the Vortex. If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, so let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the Vortex.